There are monsters that don't crawl out from under the bed. They sit at the dinner table, say grace before every meal, and steal your childhood with hands that should have kept you safe. My name is Margaret Elaine Foster. I've kept silent for nearly 70 years, but this story is no longer just mine. I grew up in a pale yellow wooden house by the sea, where the smell of salt blended with fresh cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning. My father, Thomas, went out to sea before dawn to check the lobster traps. My mother, Lily, filled our home with laughter and the scent of lavender. I was the eldest of 3. My little brother James and baby sister Edith followed me everywhere like ducklings. One Tuesday morning in September 1952, the coastal fog was thick like milk. I woke to the harsh sound of my mother coughing, sharp, deep, not like a cold. Her face was flushed with fever, her breath shallow and rapid. "Just a little flu," she said when I brought her water. "I'll be fine by evening." But she wasn't. By dusk, the fever had worsened. My father didn't go fishing that day. He carried her into the truck and turned to me with words I didn't yet know would haunt me for decades. "Take care of the kids. Mags." My grandfather, Russell Foster, had moved in after Grandma May passed. He was a stern man, with broad shoulders, calloused hands like sandpaper, and eyes that never seemed warm. "I'll watch the little ones," he said, placing a hand on my father's shoulder. His voice was steady, almost comforting, but something in me recoiled. I watched the truck disappear down the gravel road. My mother's eyes met mine one last time from under the blanket. I didn't know then it would be the last time I'd ever see her. That day dragged on like wet clothes in cold air. I fed James and Edith, told them stories, tried to make them laugh. Grandpa Russell sat on the porch, smoking his pipe, gazing at the grey horizon. Occasionally, he'd step inside, stand behind me without speaking, then vanish again. When the truck returned, only my father got out, soaked, eyes broken. "Your mother's gone," he said flatly. "Funeral's tomorrow." He hugged me with arms that had no more strength. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I nodded, like a soldier receiving orders. Then Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder, and he said something I would never forget. "Come on, Margaret. You need to rest. I'll take you to bed." But he didn't take me to my room. He took me to his. Some doors don't creak when they close. Some never needed locks, because silence was stronger than any key. That night, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every little sound, the drip from the kitchen faucet, the ticking of the wall clock, the rustle of waves from beyond the window. I had tucked James and Edith into bed. They didn't ask about Mama. Maybe they were too young. Or maybe, like me, they understood more than they could express. I sat with them until they drifted off, then wandered into the hallway, unsure of what to do with my shaking hands and hollow chest. That's when I heard Grandpa's voice, soft, strangely sweet. "Come on, Margaret, let me help you lie down." He didn't take me to the small room I shared with Edith. He led me to his room, at the back of the house, where the windows didn't open easily and the air smelled like tobacco and damp carpet. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say no. I didn't know how. At 10 years old, I didn't have the words. I only had instincts. Something about the way he closed the door, slowly, quietly, without turning the lock, sent a cold weight crawling through my body. What happened next isn't a single memory. It's broken pieces. The way the bedsheets scratched against my legs, the pressure of a calloused hand, the sound of his breath, the sound of my own, held in tight. There was no screaming, only silence, because I had already learned, in just one day, that silence was expected. That silence was safe. When I returned to my room much later, Edith was curled in a ball, hugging her pillow. The moonlight hit her face in soft silver. I wanted to crawl into bed and disappear. I wanted to tear off my skin and scream. But instead, I pulled the blanket over both of us and lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling that suddenly felt 1,000 miles away. And in the darkness, I whispered to myself, "It didn't happen. It didn't happen." But it did, and it would happen again. Silence doesn't fall all at once. It seeps in slowly, like fog, like dust, like shame. The days that followed my mother's funeral bled into one another, grey and soft-edged, like waves that refused to crash. My father returned to work not long after we buried her, his grief packed into silence and sea salt. He left before sunrise and came home long after we were asleep. He didn't speak much. When he did, it was always to say, "Make sure your brother eats," or "Be kind to your sister." He never asked me how I was, but I never expected him to. I took on the rhythm of a mother I couldn't replace. I folded clothes with small hands, reheated soup, told bedtime stories with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I made sure Edith brushed her teeth, helped James with his schoolbook, kissed their foreheads good night. My hands were always busy because I was afraid of what I'd feel if they ever stopped moving. But there was one presence I could never outpace. My grandfather, Russell Foster. His footsteps became a clock. He moved slowly, deliberately. He didn't need to raise his voice. He had something stronger, presence. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. He was always there. In the hallway when I left the bathroom. On the porch when I played with Edith. Watching. Quiet. Like a shadow I couldn't step out of. There were no locked doors in our house. Only walls that pretended not to hear. Sometimes, I thought my father must have seen it. A flash of discomfort in my eyes when Grandpa stood too close. The way my body stiffened when he touched my shoulder. But Dad would look away, like he couldn't bear to see it, because seeing meant questioning, and questioning meant confronting. And maybe he wasn't ready for that. So I learned to be invisible, to shrink. I wore oversized sweaters in the summer. I avoided eye contact. I stopped laughing. The house was filled with voices, but none of them spoke the words I needed to hear. No one asked, and I didn't tell, because the silence wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the whole house. Sometimes, hope doesn't shout. It whispers, quietly, through a door that opens too soon. It was a Saturday, the kind of day where the air smells like seaweed and pine needles, and the gulls cry a little louder than usual. Dad had gone into town to sell fish and pick up supplies. Grandpa was home. So was I. James and Edith were at a neighbour's birthday party. For once, I was alone with him. I remember scrubbing the kitchen floor harder than usual, as if I could erase something more than just dirt. I didn't hear the truck at first. It was the dog, barking, tail thudding the floor. That made me look out the window. Dad. He was home. Early. My heart stopped and started again, all in the same breath. In that moment, Grandpa froze. He was standing too close, his hand halfway toward me. I saw something flicker in his eyes, panic. Maybe, but it vanished before I could name it. He disappeared into his room, closing the door as if nothing had happened. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands shaking, apron soaked with soapy water. My father walked in with grocery bags and a tired smile. "You okay?" "Mags." I nodded too quickly. "Just cleaning." He set the bags down, handed me a small wrapped bundle. "Got you some fabric. Thought you could make a new skirt." I thanked him, voice small. I couldn't meet his eyes. And he paused. Not long, just enough for the silence to feel heavy. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're doing a good job," he said. "I know it's been hard." That was all. Then he turned to put the milk in the icebox. But in that moment, just for a second, I saw something in his face. A question, a doubt, a worry he didn't yet know how to voice. And for the first time, I thought, maybe he sees, maybe somewhere deep inside, he already knows. But I couldn't tell him. The words got stuck behind my ribs, wrapped in fear and shame. So I smiled and went back to scrubbing the floor. Change doesn't always come in thunder. Sometimes it arrives in the silence after a door finally closes. Not long after that day, something shifted, quietly, like the wind changing direction without telling the trees. One morning, over breakfast, my father placed his coffee cup down and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like months. "We're leaving," he said simply. "We need a new start." I didn't ask where. I didn't ask why. I just nodded. I understood more than I let on. 2 weeks later, we packed what little we had into the back of the truck. The house stood still behind us, its peeling walls no longer able to hold our secrets. Grandpa didn't come with us. We moved inland to a smaller town with fewer boats and more trees. Dad found work at a lumber mill. The air smelled of pine and sawdust instead of salt and sorrow. For the first time in years, I felt something like safety. I returned to school, a one-room schoolhouse with creaky floors and a teacher named Miss Carter, who wore her silver hair in a tight bun and had eyes that softened when she read poetry aloud. At first, I barely spoke. Words felt foreign in my mouth, but she handed me a notebook one day and said, "Write. Anything. Everything." So I did. I wrote about fog that never lifted, about locked hearts and open wounds, about a girl who knew how to disappear without leaving the room. And slowly, line by line, I found a voice I didn't know I still had. At home, things weren't perfect. Dad was still grieving. Some nights he sat in the dark, staring out the window, a beer untouched in his hand. But there was someone else now. Clara. She had been my mother's cousin, a quiet woman who had helped us after the funeral, cooking meals, folding laundry, keeping the house warm when grief turned everything cold. Now, she came by more often. She smiled at us, and Dad smiled back. They married in the fall, under a maple tree that bled golden light. Edith wore a dress too big for her and dropped flowers down the aisle. James carried the rings in trembling hands. And me? I just watched. Not from the sidelines, but from somewhere softer, somewhere safe. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home. And I began to believe that healing might be possible. I was 18 when I met him. And by then, I had become very skilled at hiding the cracks. Anthony wasn't like anyone I had ever met. He had just arrived in town, a young doctor with idealism in his voice and kindness in his eyes. He came to our school as part of a vaccination campaign. I was a teacher by then, barely more than a girl with a chalkboard and trembling hands, trying to pass on knowledge I had stitched together from borrowed books and silent strength. He spoke gently to the children, and he looked at me, not through me. At first, I resisted, not with words, but with distance. I smiled politely. I nodded when he spoke, but I never let him in, not fully. I couldn't. My heart still lived behind locked doors. I had spent years learning how to survive. I didn't know how to trust. But he was patient. He brought wildflowers to the schoolhouse. He waited for me at the gates when the sun dipped low. He told me about his dreams to open a free clinic, about his mother's garden, about the way the stars looked in the mountains where he grew up. And little by little, I let my guard down. One rainy afternoon, we sat on the porch steps, his coat around my shoulders, our knees touching. I told him I didn't believe in fairy tales. That love, to me, had always come with shadows. He took my hand softly, like someone holding a bird. "Then we'll write our own story," he said. It didn't happen overnight. There were nights I still woke up shaking, memories clawing at my chest. But he stayed. Every time I pushed, he didn't pull away. Every time I broke, he helped me rebuild. And in that, I found something I hadn't known I needed. Not someone to fix me, but someone who believed I wasn't broken beyond repair. With him, I learned to laugh again, to be touched without flinching, to say my name without shame. We married under a sky the color of forgiveness. The church was simple. The vows were quiet. But that day, I felt radiant, not because I was finally whole, but because I had stopped pretending to be. Scene 7. A letter to the girl I once was. If I could speak to the girl I was at 10, I wouldn't start with what was taken from her. I'd begin with what she still carried. Now, in the twilight of my years, when my hair has turned silver and my hands are no longer steady, I often sit by the window and watch the tide roll in. The sea has always known how to listen, even when no one else did. I think of that little girl in the old house by the shore, the one who held her breath at night, who became too quiet, too polite, too invisible. I think of her and want to hold her face in my hands, to look into her wide, frightened eyes and whisper what no one did back then. You are not to blame. You are not alone. And you are stronger than you think. I would tell her that the pain she hides will not define her. That one day, she'll find her voice again, not all at once, but piece by piece, word by trembling word. I'd tell her that healing is not forgetting. It's remembering differently, without fear, that scars are not shameful, but proof she survived. There will be days she wants to disappear, and others when she wishes the world would stop asking her to smile. But there will also be mornings filled with light, laughter shared across kitchen tables, hands held in silence, books that feel like home, and love that does not ask her to be smaller. She will become a teacher, a mother, a woman who walks into rooms with quiet strength, and even though the road will not be easy, she'll walk it with grace because she has already walked through fire. I don't know if she'll believe me. I don't know if I would have believed it back then. But today, I write this not just for the girl I once was, but for every child still living in silence. May you know, from this moment on, you are seen, you are worthy, and even in the darkest rooms, there is light waiting for you. Scene 8, Epilogue. The quiet that heals. Some wounds don't bleed. They whisper. They echo. But with time, even silence can find its voice. It's been more than 6 decades since I last saw that house. The one with peeling white paint and windows that never opened wide enough. I no longer walk those narrow hallways in real life, but in dreams, they still find me. Less often now, less dark. I've built a new life from the ashes of the old one. I became a teacher, a wife, a mother, a friend. I found love that didn't hurt, hands that held without taking. There were years I thought healing meant forgetting, that to move on was to erase. But healing, I've learned, is not an eraser. It's a lens that lets you look back and finally see yourself, not just as a survivor, but as someone who kept going. I still talk to the girl I once was, not out loud, but in the quiet of the mornings, when the tea is still steeping and the fog drapes gently over the sea, I whisper to her, "You made it. You mattered. And your silence was never your fault." I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it for those who still can't. For every person who walks through life with a secret burning behind their ribs, thinking they are the only one. You are not. You were never meant to carry it alone. And if you're watching this, if your voice still trembles, if your nights still know too much, please believe me, there is a life after the silence, and it is worth everything. This is my story, but it could be yours too. Let it remind you that healing is not a destination. It is a home you build with your own hands, one brick of courage at a time.